There's nobody better at supporting the end-of-life industry than today's guest. We're talking with Barbara Karnes, Hospice RN, author of the Little Blue Book, Gone From My Sight. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter, here with Helen Bauer.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. You know, what can we say? We absolutely love Barbara Karnes.
She's the best.
She's amazing. She really is. It's been a while since we talked with her. It's been a year. So today we had her back. This is her third visit with us, her third interview. And she's just, I don't know how to describe what she does.
She is so open and honest, and she can take a very complex subject and bring it into simple language that communicates so beautifully.
It's perfect because the way she teaches isn't just great for patients and families, but even for end-of-life practitioners, because I learned something from how she teaches, even though it's stuff that I've taught to families myself. I learn something every single post, every single time I hear her speak. I always learn something from her.
She's just fantastic that way. So we hope that you enjoy this interview with Barbara Karnes as much as we did. Barbara, it's been just a little over a year since we last talked to you on our podcast, so we're very glad to have you back again. So, Barbara, welcome back to the Heart of Hospice.
Thank you. I'm always excited to be back here. And a year, has it been that long?
I think it has.
Of course, a lot has happened in a year, hasn't it? We'll have lots to talk about.
I think so.
Definitely. So, I guess it's been a little over 12 months in a calendar year, but in pandemic years, it's felt like a really long time. So let's jump right into that. What have you been seeing? What trends have you been seeing in the last year when it comes to people who are coming to you for information about end-of-life care?
I think the most, how can I say this? What struck me most and what I worked with healthcare professionals in this pandemic year and a half, is that the medical model, which is where most healthcare professionals are and work, the medical model treats diseases that people have, and death is a failure. Death is not being able to fix that disease. And with COVID and this last year and a half, healthcare workers were having, and some still are, I shouldn't make that a past tense, 4, 5, 6 deaths a shift. And where I work in end of life, and my philosophy is taking care of people, not the disease, and that everybody dies, and we do our best, but death is going to happen to everyone. So that philosophy for me is death isn't a failure. Death is the ultimate goal. For most healthcare workers, death is a failure. And they were ending their shift with this weight on their shoulders of, I've failed. So my job was to work with healthcare professionals and help them find balance. And that was through ritual. That was through finding closure at the end of every shift. And I hope that gave some balance and support. And that's where most of my energy went.
That's interesting. So you had people in the healthcare profession, not necessarily in hospice, but people just in general healthcare coming to you and saying, how can we deal with these overwhelming amounts of deaths that we now normally they probably wouldn't see that many, but during the pandemic they were seeing an unusual amount of deaths. So that's interesting that they were coming to you like that. So what kind of help were you giving them? You said some about having closure at the end of each shift. Can you be more specific about some of the things that you encourage them to do?
Sure. At the end of the shift, when the person goes home, the healthcare worker goes home, my advice is walk in the front door, take all your clothes off, and go straight to the shower. And get in the shower and in your mind's eye, wash off not just the physical, the germs that you've carried, but wash the emotions, the thoughts, and to actually see as hot as you can stand it, hot water pouring over your head. In your mind's eye, see the emotions, the sadness, the fear, the tension literally go down the drain. And then after you've washed it all off and you stand there and you're still in that hot water, keep your eyes closed and imagine that your body, all emotions, mental, spiritual, that you are this sparkling, clean being. Get out of the shower, dry yourself off, and then leave work and all thoughts. They've gone down the drain, and have a quiet evening so that you can then go to sleep and recharge, rebuild, and go back to work the next day. I also suggested keeping a journal. And I suggest this for my hospice workers as well. When you have a death, write in your journal the person's name, a few comments about that person, that experience, and the date, and then send them on their way. You need to have closure so that you're not carrying all of these thoughts and literally these beings with you on into your work. So closure is vital when you're working with end of life. And I could say closure is vital when you're working with a lot of areas in life, not just end of life.
Well, you know, what you're saying about healthcare workers in the hospital experiencing those cumulative, all those deaths, right? The cumulative grief that comes with that. I think that hospice professionals experience some of the same thing, and ours became a heavier grief burden, even though that's the work we do every day. But we were restricted from doing the things we would typically do to support a patient when they're actively dying and when a family is experiencing that loss. You know, restrictions from being at the bedside, supporting a family from a distance who could also not be at the bedside. I think that enhanced, it accelerated our grief as well. Even though we are used to death, and that's part of, you know, the work that we do every day, but it does create a much heavier burden when you're having to deal with deaths that way.
I worked with a lot of hospices, did a lot of Q&As with hospices around the country. And my key message to hospices is that we had to learn to think outside of the box. We had to, because touch and presence is a huge part of hospice's end of life care. It's part of the medicine that we bring. And COVID took that away from us. COVID took our facial expressions away from us. It took touch away from us. It took being in the home in many cases away from us. And so what I tried to stress is that the phone became our best friend, and that in thinking outside of the box, think of the fear that the family in their home who will say wife knows her husband is going to die in her bedroom, and that she's going to be there alone because even the adult children can't come or couldn't during a lot of this. And so my suggestion was that on Monday, the hospice nurse calls and checks and what's going on. Tell me what's happening. On Tuesday, the social worker calls. What's happening? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? On Wednesday, the chaplain calls. On Thursday, a volunteer assigned to that family before death calls. The volunteer's job is to become the best friend. And do you need anything at the store? What did you have for dinner? The best friend. On Friday, the nurse calls again, checking in. Saturday and Sunday, the volunteer calls. So every single day, that isolated caregiver has a touchstone. And that was my suggestion of how hospice could really continue to provide support and care for families that couldn't be there in the hours before death, that whether nursing facility or a hospice house or at home. I suggested this exercise, and that sit down at home in your favorite recliner, close your eyes, and visualize Dad in his home or nursing facility in bed, asleep. And in your mind's eye, you walk over to that bed and you do what your heart tells you to do. That may be in your mind to crawl in bed and just hold him. It may be that you want to sit on the bed and hold his hand. But whatever your heart tells you to do in your mind, you're doing that. And then you start talking to Dad. And you tell him everything you would say if you were there. And at some point, you'll have said it all. You'll have cried it all. And then you stay there some more in your mind until you feel that you can get up. And then you open your eyes and you get up and you know that in your heart, you've been with Dad and you've helped say goodbye. It's not as good as being there, but it's better than nothing.
Barbara, this is why we appreciate you so much. You have such creative ideas and ways to help people manage things like this. So thank you for that. I remember recently seeing in some of your Facebook posts that you had a Q&A with a hospice agency, and they had said something about they weren't able to use volunteers. And you had a very strong reaction to that.
I remember this.
I remember. Tell us more about how hospices can use volunteers during a time like this pandemic.
Well, and actually, we can use our volunteers even if it's not a pandemic. Right. I was the director of a couple different hospices, and volunteers are such a wonderful gift, and they're really not utilized to the extent that I think they should be. So I believe that even in a non-pandemic time, that you assign a volunteer before the death, and we do to go in and sit down, but I think that should be expanded and stress that you're going to become their best friend. You're going to be their touchstone. It isn't that you go in once a week and you sit for 4 hours while the wife goes and does the grocery shopping. I want, as a volunteer, I want that volunteer to visit and talk and be a friend. And so that's one aspect. With the death, I also believe that you assign a volunteer, that same volunteer that was with the family before the death continues being the best friend. A big part of grief is isolation, and multiply that many times now with COVID, which is still there. So that isolation, the natural inclination for the griever is to stay home and just stay. Maybe not even get dressed, just stay home, not call anyone, not do anything. So the volunteer has to be the pursuer. Let's not, what can I do for you? But showing up at the doorstep and being invited in now that COVID is over and seeing a sink full of dishes and let's do these dishes. Come on, let's do this. That's what a best friend would do. And that's what we want our volunteer to do. Now I'm hoping that bereavement support groups are starting up again. They were just on Zoom, but hopefully now we'll get into face-to-face group. And so that volunteer, because the griever is not going to want to go. The griever is not going to want to go to any group, anything. And so it's up to the volunteer to say, we've got this great support group and it's Wednesday night. I'm going to pick you up. We'll stop at McDonald's and get a hamburger or something, and then we'll go and I'll go with you. Volunteers are an integral part of what we do in end of life. And I want to see them used more. Got to think outside the box.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Surely. So one of the trends that I've been seeing is a lot of dialogue around end-of-life doulas. Yeah. They have skills and availability, and I think fewer time constraints a lot of times than hospice team members do. What do you see? What are you seeing as far as how teams are incorporating end-of-life doulas into the work that we do to take care of hospice patients?
I would love to see end-of-life doulas be part of the hospice team, because when I started hospice work in the beginning of the 80s, if you look back, I was really an end-of-life doula. That's what doulas do today, what I did then, because my goal was to be with the family and the patient at the moment of death. I can't tell you how many floors I slept on, how many sofas I spent the night on. There wasn't the time constraints that Medicare in micromanaging hospice and wage an hour has placed on hospice. So how hospices can work with doulas in the system, I don't know. Because then you've got wage an hour. How do you figure out? Because now hospice nurses, if you spend more than an hour and a half or 2 hours, you're considered that you've stayed too long. And that to me just breaks my heart, because when that family needs us the most, now they're generally alone. And so enter end-of-life doula. How they get paid, and what I'm seeing is that they're offering packages where it's a package of hours, and they track that. And what I hear many a doula say, if those hours wear out, they've exhausted them, I'm probably not going to say I'm not going to come. So end-of-life doulas are giving the emotional, physical support that families need so much. So hospice has become more medicalized as hospice has been absorbed into the hospital systems and home health care systems and nursing facility systems. And so do I dare say that in my mind, they've lost a precious part of what hospice does. And that's giving time, unchecked time with caregivers and with the patients. That's really sad.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely true. Coming from a regulatory background, I hate to do this, but it's it blends in with everything we do. Medicare tracks that. The visits that we're doing in that last week of life, in that last 3 days of life. So there's obviously concern. Medicare doesn't waste time tracking stuff unless there's some sort of deficit, some sort of cause for concern. And we don't always handle that well. We don't always have the presence in those last few days of lives the way we should. And I think sometimes that the type of work that an end-of-life doula offers would not be necessary if hospice teams were able to fully offer and be present in a home with a patient and a family the way they should be, the way we should be able to do it.
Well, and the original intent of hospice, the hospice philosophy was, all of it was leading up to the moment of death, was the support, the guidance to make this moment of death a sacred experience, so that then the family will have a sacred memory. But if we don't educate the family on what approaching death is going to be like, so that they have some knowledge, and then if we leave them alone because we don't have any role models on what it's like to die, we have left that family alone with fear and uncertainty. And that's not the original intent of hospice. And so it's the original philosophy that I think is getting, do I use the word distorted maybe, by all the regs, all the micromanaging. The ultimate goal has kind of gotten lost in all of this micromanaging. And yes, if hospice had that same philosophy today that it had when it started, then we wouldn't need end-of-life doulas. But we do need them because of where we are today.
Yeah.
I just don't know how to pay them.
Yeah, exactly. We wanted to take a moment to remind you that the mission of the Heart of Hospice is to be an advocate for quality end-of-life care. One way we do that is by providing education and consulting for hospice and palliative care professionals. The leadership of the Heart of Hospice has over 20 years of combined hospice experience. We can provide training for your interdisciplinary team through webinars and virtual events on topics such as self-care and grief management for professionals, diversity, competency, and healthy boundaries, or a topic of your choice. Hospice. If you need a speaker for a leadership or community event, please contact us at host@theheartofhospice.com. Now back to today's episode.
Barbara, during this past year and a half, there have been a lot of changes that have happened in the end-of-life care field. What are some of the things that you have heard, or maybe some things that you have seen that have changed? And what changes do you think are going to stick around for a while, even after the pandemic?
That's a huge question.
Maybe I need to be more specific.
I would hope that the pandemic and taking away of all of our tools in end of life, in hospice, I hope the gift there is that as we reopen up, we will reevaluate what's important in our toolkit and what isn't. You know, just like we're talking about families being alone at the moment of death. I hope that hospices can reevaluate that. More and more hospice patients are in nursing facilities. And I would hope that because of COVID, that the hospices were working with the families in the same manner that they're working with the families of the patient at home. Because oftentimes in the nursing facility, the family doesn't get as much attention. And yet family is an equal amount of end-of-life work. And yet a lot more emphasis in today's hospice is on the patient, particularly if they're in a facility. So COVID hopefully has given the hospices the opportunity to work more with the families, and that they will continue doing that.
We've had an interesting use of telemedicine, which goes against our grain, right? We're all about touching in person and having those conversations. And here we are having to use telehealth. So what my hope is that we have discovered that that's a very, very good tool, very useful, and that we can do it, that we have skills that we can tap into, communication skills that maybe we didn't hone as finely as we should have before because we didn't have to. But now, using telehealth, I think that's a really valuable tool, and it's useful, and I'm really hoping that we carry that forward to stay connected with our families, especially since people, remote caregiving is a huge thing across the United States these days.
Well, and before COVID, before you could Zoom, in a moment's notice, the family and significant others that were not close at hand were kind of left out. If you lived in Virginia and mom's in Texas on hospice, Virginia family kind of got left out until they came. But with Zoom, hospice can set up, do it with a social worker, have the social worker or the chaplain. But I kind of like the social worker to start with, to get that relationship built with the primary care family members of the patient. And that's where Zoom is an incredible gift.
That is very true. That is very true. So let's talk about the all-important self-care.
As always.
Yes. Self-care has really taken a beating during the pandemic. We've needed it more than ever, and yet we probably tell ourselves, I don't have enough time for it right now. From your perspective, Barbara, what changes in self-care have you seen or have you heard about with people? And what would you encourage people to do when it comes to self-care?
Well, you put your own oxygen mask on first. And yet most healthcare professionals are in the work we do is because we're caregivers, because we look to others. And in being caregivers, we tend to put ourselves last. That's just part of being a caregiver that we need to eliminate, to overcome. And there are so many tools, just the rituals, the closure for every patient that dies, having a buddy system. I think is really imperative for hospice workers, I'll include doulas, for end of life workers, is you need one person that you can share with, that you can download with, that you can call on the phone and say, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what just happened. Yeah. And know that you're not judged, that you can get it out. Because if you don't get it out, it will stay inside of you and it'll do something. So as caregivers and caretakers, we have to take care of ourselves first. That means eating properly. That means exercise. That means sleeping. All of the things that all of us need to do, no matter what career you're in. But then you've got to add some extra care, because in working with end of life, and this just popped into my head, it used to be that everyone who worked in hospice because they felt they had a calling. You know, their heart sang to them and said, this is what you're supposed to do. Today, that isn't necessarily the case. There are a lot of hospice workers who are working in end of life because it's a job, because it's a paycheck. And so they actually need even more support and care because of our medical model, which they've brought with them, says death is a failure. And not everyone can work in end of life. And so it's really imperative that hospice administrators make sure they hire people that have an understanding that death is not a failure, that everybody dies. And as part of, just like as part of volunteer training, is what's your idea of death, afterlife, all of these areas on end of life that we ask our volunteers to make sure that they stay healthy in doing this work. We need to do that with our employees. And there will be people that end up working in end of life that should be in home health, because home health fixes and end of life doesn't. So yes, self-care and knowing yourself and your beliefs, I think, is really, really important. And having your buddy and having a closure ritual. And there's, the taking the shower every night, that mental visualization, that's good for all of us to do, really, to wash off the day. But because we work an end of life, we often carry more than the average bear. And so it really would be healthful to have that kind of ritual every day you come home from work.
So let's get personal for just a minute, if you don't mind. How has your self-care changed over the past year and a half?
Oh, wow. I still ask myself every night when I'm in bed, what have I traded a day of my life for? I still ask myself what was good about today, so that I go to sleep on a positive note. But if I'm honest with you, and I try to be, I've been depressed. I'm really depressed about the world, and I feel powerless and in my ability to change so much that I think needs to be changed. So in my self-care, what I have to do is narrow my circle and change those things I can change, and just turn over to divine order that which I can't change. And isolation has been hard because I haven't been able, the last year and a half, we're opening up now. I'm blessed in that my adult children work for me for BK Books, and our office is in our house. So, but because of COVID and the grandchildren and all the stuff, I knew they were in the office, and I'd put a mask on and maybe peek my head in the door. But the family gatherings, all around the dinner table, year and a half, didn't have them, and really missed them. That was really hard.
Yeah. I think all of those factors, for many people, it created an emotional depression, and it was hard. It was very hard, and to say it is the struggle is real. It really was. It was a struggle for many people when it came to that. So thank you for being so open and transparent about that. I appreciate that.
Well, I think it's most people. It's not even many people. I think it's most people are depressed and don't even realize it.
That's true.
So, Barbara, your website and your books, your videos, your blog, all of your social media postings have been a huge support to the end-of-life community, including providers and also patients and family members, too. How can our listeners connect with you? To find your blog, join your Facebook group, how can they connect with you?
Go to www.bkbooks.com. That's the website. On the website, you can sign up for my blogs, and you would get an email with, it's about every week that I put out a blog. People can write me. I have people that write and ask questions. You can do that at the comment part on the blog website, or barbara@bkbooks.com. Send me an email, and I answer all the questions that you send in to me. That's what I'm here for. So certainly reach out and touch me.
Well, I will say personally that I have been blessed by the Facebook posts that you have been putting out. They're very encouraging, as well as just very instructful. I mean, I learn so much every time that you post something, and I appreciate that you do that. And so I would encourage our listeners to follow you on your Facebook page as well.
I forgot. Yes, Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm also on LinkedIn, and put the blogs and answer questions and post little tidbits.
Barbara, you touch so many lives, probably more than you can even imagine. And we know that you're making a difference in the lives of many, many people. And you're touching many lives. So thank you for what you're doing through the written word and through the spoken word. You are just touching many lives. And we are grateful to you for what you're doing to encourage and bless the end of life industry. So thank you for that.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that.
I don't even know if we need to close this to say anything else because it's Barbara Karnes and she's amazing. I love the transparency that she shared with us, the things that she's dealt with and the challenges that she's had personally over the last year and a half during the pandemic. It's been an interesting year for all of us.
It really has. And I think she's right when she says that it's not just that there's a majority of people that have been experiencing depression. I think it's probably everyone who has been experiencing some form or some level of depression in some way or another, because things have changed so much over this past year with the pandemic that we've been forced to do things that we're just not comfortable with doing. And I think we also realized how much we need each other.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think maybe that comes down to it. That sums the whole interview up. She has learned, and we acknowledge and agree, that we really need each other. Hospice teams need patients and need families. This whole telemedicine thing, which is a great tool, is not a substitute for being there. That's right. We have found that our empathic skills and our empathic natures as hospice practitioners draw us to be present at the bedside, to be present with the family. And so we found, not only did our patients and families need us, but we needed them as well. What an awesome lady. So if you're interested in finding Barbara's information, she mentioned it, but we're going to repeat it again, bkbooks.com. You can sign up, subscribe to her blogs. I get her emails. They're awesome. I learn something from her blog posts every single time she puts one out. Her Facebook page is an awesome way to connect. You can see how she answers questions and talks about different scenarios that are challenging in end-of-life care.
And she offered to have anyone send her an email with a question.
That's right.
And her email address is barbara@bkbooks.com. So if you have a question for Barbara, feel free to send her an email. She would love to hear from you. And just to let you know, we would love to hear from you as well. So feel free to send us an email also at host@theheartofhospice.com.
One of the great things about Barbara's materials is they're not big encyclopedias. They're not full of medical jargon that you can't understand. They're pamphlets, basically, small booklets. And then there are also videos. I believe there's some Spanish language versions of them. Just some great materials, very accessible, very understandable.
It's practical wisdom. And we say it's practical wisdom, and yet it's often things that in the heat of the moment, if we can put it that way, we forget. And so it's nice that we can use her materials in such a way that it really does remind us of what we're all about and what hospice and end-of-life care is really all about.
If your hospice agency is looking for resources to give to your patients and families, BK Books has some great options for you. You can also find Barbara's signature work, Gone From My Sight, the little blue book, available for purchase on her site as well.
Thank you, Barbara, for sharing this time with us. And thank you, our listeners, for taking the time to listen to this interview with our friend, Barbara Karnes.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice today. I'm Helen Bauer here with Jerry Fenter. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and please take time to leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, you can send us an email at host@theheartofhospice.com. And you can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.